The most exhausting thing I have ever done was pretending to be someone else every single day for nearly 30 years. My life was a stage, and I was its lead actor, desperate for a standing ovation from an audience that was perpetually unimpressed. I didn't just want their approval. I needed it. I needed it like I needed air, and the constant suffocating anxiety of not having it was the defining feature of my existence. From the clothes I wore, carefully selected based on what I thought would be perceived as cool or successful, to the opinions I shared, which were often just watered-down versions of whatever the most confident person in the room had just said, everything was a performance. My own thoughts, my own desires, my own tastes. They were buried so deep I wasn't even sure they existed anymore. I was a chameleon, changing my colors to match my surroundings, so terrified of clashing, of being seen as different, that I had forgotten my own original hue. I lived in a state of high-alert anxiety, a constant monitoring of social cues that would make a secret agent proud. Did they laugh at my joke? Did they like my post? Did their eyes glaze over when I started talking? Every interaction was a performance review, and I was my own harshest critic. I would replay conversations in my head for hours, dissecting every word, every pause, searching for evidence of my social success, or, more often, my failure. The digital world was just a new, more quantifiable stage for this sickness. The number of likes on a photo became a direct measure of my self-worth. A comment left unreplied to was a public shaming. I was a slave to the little red notification icon, my mood for the entire day held hostage by the whims of an algorithm and the fleeting attention of near strangers. This constant performance was draining me of my life force. I was perpetually tired, not from a lack of sleep, but from the sheer effort of upholding the facade. I was a master of the social smile, the agreeable nod, the enthusiastic, "That's so interesting," when, in reality, I was bored or disagreed entirely. I thought this was what it meant to be liked. I thought this was the price of admission for friendship, for love, for belonging. I was paying with the currency of my own soul, and I was going bankrupt. The inciting incident, the moment the stage lights flickered and died, wasn't a grand betrayal. It was something much smaller, much more common, which is perhaps why it hurt so much. I had decided to throw a party for my circle of friends, but this couldn't be just any party. In my mind, it had to be the perfect event. It was my chance to solidify my status, to prove my worth as a host, as a friend, as a person. For 3 weeks, I obsessed over every detail. I curated the perfect playlist, a delicate balance of popular hits and indie tracks to show I was both relatable and cultured. I spent a fortune on artisanal cheeses and craft beers. I cleaned my apartment until it looked like a showroom, a sterile and impersonal space that reflected none of my actual personality, but which I hoped would be seen as sophisticated. I was a nervous wreck, a director on the opening night of a play I had written, produced, and starred in. The night of the party, I was in full performance mode. I floated from group to group, making sure everyone's drink was full, laughing a little too loudly at every joke, a frantic, smiling host desperate for his production to be a hit. I was so busy managing everyone else's experience that I wasn't having one of my own. By the end of the night, I was bone-tired but buzzing with a nervous energy. People had said they had a great time. I had received my applause. But then came the moment that changed everything. As I was clearing some glasses in the kitchen, I overheard 2 of my closest friends talking in the hallway, their voices low, not realizing I was within earshot. They weren't talking about the great time they had. They were dissecting the party, critiquing it. One made a joke about the pretentious cheese. The other complained that the music was trying too hard. They weren't being malicious. They were just being casual, indifferent. And in their indifference, they shattered my entire world. The pain of that moment was physical. It felt like a punch to the gut, knocking all the air out of my lungs. It wasn't just about the cheese or the music. It was the realization that my 3 weeks of obsessive effort, my desperate, soul-crushing performance, had been, for them, just another forgettable Saturday night. The applause I thought I had earned was just polite noise. The validation I had sacrificed my sanity for was an illusion. I had poured every ounce of myself into winning their approval, and it had meant nothing. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my perfect, sterile apartment, surrounded by the debris of my performance. And for the first time, I didn't blame them. I felt a different kind of pain, a deeper, colder ache, the pain of self-betrayal. Who was this person who worked so hard to impress people who didn't seem to care that much? Who was this actor, and what happened to the man behind the mask? The ingratitude was the catalyst, but the real problem was me. That realization sent me spiraling, not into depression, but into a desperate search for an alternative. I started reading, not self-help books about how to be more charismatic, but deep psychology. I wanted to understand the why behind my disease to please. And that's how I found Carl Jung and his concept of individuation. Jung wrote about the process of becoming a true individual, of differentiating oneself from the collective consciousness and the expectations of others. He described the persona, the social mask we wear to fit in, the very mask I had mistaken for my own face. He argued that a healthy life wasn't about perfecting the mask, but about having the courage to take it off and integrate the real self underneath. My identity, I realized, was not my own. It was a patchwork quilt, stitched together with threads of my parents' expectations, my friends' opinions, and society's definition of success. There was almost nothing of me in it. This new knowledge was both terrifying and liberating. It meant that my entire way of being was a lie, but it also meant that there was a truth to be found. It meant there was a way out. And so, I began what I can only describe as an approval detox. It was a conscious, deliberate, and often painful process of unlearning a lifetime of habits. I started small, in the privacy of my own life. I had a list of classic movies that I had always claimed to have seen and loved, just because they were culturally significant. I had never seen them. One Friday night, instead of going out, I stayed in and watched one. I didn't like it, and I admitted it to myself. Me, do not enjoy this critically acclaimed film. It was a tiny, insignificant rebellion, but it felt like a tectonic shift. I was allowing myself to have a taste that was my own. From there, the experiments grew. I went to a restaurant and ordered what I actually wanted, not what seemed like the coolest or healthiest option. I bought a shirt, a bright, colorful shirt that the old me would have deemed too loud, simply because looking at it made me happy. I started listening to a genre of music I had previously dismissed as unsophisticated, and I loved it. Each of these small acts was a reclamation of a tiny piece of my stolen identity. The hardest part was applying this to my interactions with others. I started by simply not offering an opinion when I didn't have one. The silence was uncomfortable at first. I felt boring, disengaged, but I realized that my old opinions were just noise anyway. Then I moved on to stating a simple preference. A friend would ask, "Want to see the new action movie?" And instead of my automatic, "Sure, sounds great," I would say, "I'm not really in the mood for that tonight. How about we check out that new documentary instead?" Sometimes they'd say no and we'd do something else. Sometimes they'd be intrigued and say yes. But every time the world didn't end. The friendship didn't crumble. In fact, something strange happened. People started treating me with a different kind of respect. They started asking my opinion, as if it actually mattered. They were finally meeting the real me, and it turned out he was far more interesting than the agreeable actor he replaced. This journey of small rebellions led me to the ultimate test, the climax. I received an invitation to a big party. It was the kind of event the old me would have killed to attend. It was hosted by a popular, well-connected person in my social circle. Being there meant being in. It was a golden opportunity for validation, a chance to perform on the biggest stage. The invitation sat on my counter, a siren call back to my old life. My anxiety flared up. The fear of missing out, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of what people would think if I didn't go. It was all there, a familiar, toxic cocktail. But there was something else I wanted to do that night. I had recently started a personal project, a passion I had kept secret for years. I was trying to write a novel. It was something that was purely for me. It had no audience, no guarantee of success, no likes attached to it. It was just a quiet, burning desire. And that Saturday night, I felt a powerful urge to work on it. So I was faced with a choice: the stage or the sanctuary, the applause of the crowd, or the quiet satisfaction of my own work? I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the accept button. My heart was pounding. This felt bigger than just a party. It was a choice between who I had been and who I was trying to become. I took a deep breath, and I declined the invitation. I sent a simple, polite message thanking them for the invite, but saying I had other plans. I didn't make up an elaborate excuse. I just said no. That night, I sat at my desk, the city lights twinkling outside my window. The silence in my apartment was profound. There was no music, no chatter, no performance. It was just me, my thoughts, and the blinking cursor on a blank page. And as I started to write, a feeling washed over me that was more powerful than any validation I had ever received from others. It was a deep, resonant feeling of rightness, of purpose, of self-possession. This solitude wasn't empty. It was full. It was filled with my own presence. That night, the productive, meaningful solitude was infinitely more gratifying than any empty praise I could have received at that party. The change after that night was radical. It was as if by choosing myself, I had sent out a new signal to the universe. Some of my friends, the ones who were only there for the performance, the ones who needed me to be their agreeable audience, they began to drift away. The invitations became less frequent. The dynamic had changed, and the new me no longer fit into their script. And it hurt, but it was a clean, honest kind of hurt. It was the pain of amputation, of removing something that was no longer healthy. But then, something even more amazing happened. The space that was left was filled by something new. The people who stayed, the ones who were intrigued by my newfound authenticity, they leaned in closer. And new people entered my life, people who were drawn not to my mask, but to my actual face. My relationships became deeper, more honest, more meaningful. The desperate actor had left the stage, and what remained was just me. And it turned out that was more than enough. The great lesson I learned is that the approval of others is a fundamentally unstable foundation upon which to build a life. It shifts with the wind, with moods, with trends. The only solid ground is the approval that comes from within. When you stop auditioning for a role in other people's lives and start directing your own, the need for applause fades away. It's replaced by the quiet, unshakable confidence of knowing who you are. And what about you? What stage are you performing on? What applause are you so desperate to hear? What would happen if you walked off that stage and just for a day did something that was purely, authentically, and unapologetically for you? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to read it.